Hey, welcome to another Chasing the Wind podcast. This morning, the wind is blowing in such a way that I want to talk about landmarks. Recently, my church blessed me with a 2-month sabbatical and just time to rest, to just recharge, and it was that for me. But there was a wonderful thing that God did in the midst of that. He did a lot of cool things. You'll probably hear about him in the coming weeks and throughout this podcast. But one particular thing that just came out to me while I was on this podcast, or pardon me, on my sabbatical, was I went to a conference up in Michigan. And maybe I'll talk about that conference at some point. But while I was up there, I found myself just 3 hours from where I was raised in Illinois. And my parents are getting older, having some health issues, and so I thought, well, I'm just going to zip on down there, see the P's while I'm this close. But I was also close to another place that is very, very dear to my heart, and I was really feeling that the wind was blowing. The Spirit was leading me to visit a couple old landmarks in my life. In the Bible, the landmarks are those places that they commemorate some place where we met God, where God did something in our life, and they would often be told to put up altars, put stones up to remind what it was. But there's just places in our lives that were really impactful. So I stopped, because we were on a different time zone. I actually gained an hour going back to the Midwest. And so I decided that I'd change my course a little bit. I think the Holy Spirit was leading me, but I stopped at a wonderful place, and I have a coffee mug here from Olivet Nazarene University. I'm a Nazarene pastor. That is where I went for my undergrad. It is my alma mater. And I decided I was going to go back to Olivet. I hadn't been there in probably 15 years. And so I went back there, and I'll tell you, I was just excited about this place. Olivet has grown. It is the Chicago Bears training camp. That's where they do all their summer preparations for football. And so I decided to go back there and just check it out. And I mean, it's just exploded. There's new buildings and everything else, and it was just a wonderful place. And I found myself just wandering around in awe of how the place had grown and the wonderful things that were there. But here was the really cool thing is I found myself going back to some of the old buildings that were there 25, 30 years ago when I was a student at Olivet Nazarene University. Now, here's the cool thing about this whole story. I didn't come to the Lord till I was 21 years old. I did not plan on going to college. When I came to Christ, he messed up my whole life. I say that tongue in cheek. I never planned to go into college, never planned on doing any kind of formal education. Just wasn't who I was. I was a bad student in high school and in grade school. So I was just lazy. I confess that. But when Jesus gets hold of your life and the wind starts blowing, he takes you to places you may not ever expect to go. And that is so cool. He might have messed up my plans, but his plans were falling right into place. I always can maintain that Olivet took me because they figured this young man who was 21 years old, who didn't have any ACTs, no SATs, no college prep courses. I think they just thought, we'll take his money for the first year. That's not really what they thought, but I kind of joke about that. I think it's a miracle that I even got through it. I remember the day I graduated from Olivet, and I sat there after I got my diploma, and my hands were just shaking with that diploma in my hands of something that great and significant in my life. But as I walked through the buildings and whatnot, things had changed. And if there's one thing I've learned from Terry Wardle, who is the director of my doctoral program, all of life is a landscape of change. So I went down, one of the first places I went down to was what we used to call the Red Room. It was like the student union is what they would have called it, just the lounge for everybody. And it was like a mall down there. There was a Starbucks and all sorts of stuff. But one of the things I could pinpoint certain areas in there where things took place. I remember the little room where there was a bunch of us who were older ministerial students. We were not right out of high school. Maybe some of us we'd been out of high school and been living our lives for 10 years or whatever. I was 5 years out of high school and starting this big adventure. And there was a little room down there where you could kind of meet as groups, and we called ourselves the older ministerial students. And one of the members of this elite group worked in the carpenter shop, and he made a sign that said OMS, older ministerial students. We all signed it, and we tucked it up in one of those tile ceilings for posterity, that someday when the great walls of Ludwig Hall would fall down, that they would find that and we would live in infamy. Okay, that's a little dramatic, but you get the idea. And I don't know that anybody found that because the room was changed and it was wrong. They probably threw it in some burn pile somewhere. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But it is etched in the dusty hallways of my mind, and so many memories came back as I went there. The discussions, the theological discussions, and the laughter, and all the fun things that went on there. The conversations, the connections, the people that we met. And going over to a Burke Administration Building where most of my religion classes took place, and that had been changed a little bit, but it was still just this great place, and the memories coming. And I went through some of the new buildings. That was really cool. But landmarks are not only places. Sometimes they're people. So I decided I'd take a chance, and I texted a gentleman who was the one who got me to Olivet Nazarene University, a wonderful man named Tony Fightmaster. Maybe he'll watch this. I don't know, but I just love Tony. Tony kind of kept me afloat while I was at Olivet. There was times when I would be struggling, and Tony would just encourage me, and Tony was always positive and always just, uplifting and encouraging to me. And I was like, Lord, I don't know that Tony's here today, but I'm going to reach out to him. And I reach out to Tony. I said, Tony, are you in town? Are you on campus? And he goes, I am. Are you? Well, now, he was in the admissions office 25, 30 years ago, and now he's in the development office raising money. That's usually how it works in those situations. But I got to meet with Tony, and we caught up for about an hour and a half. And Tony is one of my landmarks. Sometimes people are landmarks to us. It doesn't have to be a place. Tony was one of those people that is etched forever in my mind and will be in my mind, hold dearly in my heart. It was like he and I had picked up right where we left off. I left Olivet, and my heart was full, and a couple days later, as I was visiting my parents, I actually went back to the church just a block over from where my mom lives now, and went to the church where I got saved, where I found Christ. Earlier, actually, he found me. That's a funny phrase, isn't it? We found Christ. He wasn't the one that lost, I was. Earlier this summer, I actually went back to another church where I was raised all my life, and I won't get into that right now, but it's been a year for me, these last 6 months or so, of God kind of take me back to landmarks, remembering my story. And landmarks are a great thing because they show us where we've been. They show us where we've come from. They show us how far we've come. So they had flipped the sanctuary in that little church in the Midwest where I got saved, that little Nazarene church. But I could pinpoint the exact place where the altar was when I came to Christ. I can remember the two gentlemen, and well as the pastor who prayed with me that day when I came to Christ. It was Martin Arney, who's gone to be with the Lord. It was my pastor, Jim Pester, and Dean Chelfant. Dean's gone to be with the Lord. But I can remember them praying with me, these men, these great men of God, praying with me as I gave my life to Christ. Was able to think about some of the people who were in that church who prayed for me when I went off to Olivet. Those are the things that sometimes we need to remember, those things, those landmarks. We need to remember, if we can't get back to them, but to remember them in the dusty hallways of our mind, because they are there and they speak to us. They tell us where we came from. And sometimes they can kind of help us get where we're going. I learned on that day of graduation, no more education, no more, I'm done. Yeah. God said, well, maybe, we'll see. He had other plans. This mug, it's just a mug. But a couple days later, after I had gotten home, this came in the mail with a bag of Olivet's original brew. They have their own brew of coffee. And so Tony had sent me this mug and a thing of coffee and a book by the president, John Bowling, a wonderful book called Revision, a timely book that I needed right now. Or at that time, I should say, when he's mailed it. Landmarks. What are yours? What are the places where you've met God and where God has met you, where the wind was blowing and taking you to places you'd never been before? So enjoy the adventure. Enjoy the journey is the destination. Have fun with it. Thanks for stopping by and letting me stop by.